She mentioned that I started learning to build model airplanes when I was 2 years old. This is the exact model that my dad and I built when we were 2 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember building it, but I didn't remember the involvement until we found a letter that my mother had written where she had kind of taken dictation describing the conversation between myself and my father when I was 2 years old. And I was constantly asking my dad to go, no, let me do it, let me do it. So that went on that was just the start. I'll go through this part a little bit more, a little bit later. When we were coming up with the title for me talking to you, building a global brand one banjo at a time, the thing that I wanted to share with you that's absolutely amazing to us, and a little bit of background on the company. We're a corporation, but my wife and I own the company, and she's the CEO of the company. So I will often refer to the company as we and not just me, because it's both of us, and it's our whole team. But Deering, the Great American Banjo Company, was coined by my wife Janet probably 20 years ago, and it started becoming the hallmark of what we put out there in our promotion. And it's become a brand, and it's just absolutely amazing to us that we have a brand. We didn't start off as young kids building instruments for a living so that we would have a brand. But now we have a brand, and we do about 30% of our business overseas, so to that extent we can call ourselves global. We're not on every continent yet, but at some point we will. This is a picture of our factory in Spring Valley. It's in the Costa de Oro section of Spring Valley, and we have about 18,000 square feet. We've been in this building since 2001. I'll just give you a little bit of background on our company. We're in our 38th year. We started officially in 1975. We're currently making a little over 200 banjos a week. We have 47 employees as part of our company. Now, on a global perspective, we're a pretty tiny company. Even compared to the guitar industry, we're a pretty tiny company. But compared to our competition, our nearest competitor has 4 employees and makes 200 banjos a year. So we own a huge part of our market. Too much, in fact. I wish the market was bigger than that and we had more competition, because we'd end up being able to make more banjos. Kind of a statistic that you wouldn't normally think about. We have a forklift. We're the only banjo maker big enough to need a forklift. You know, so it just absolutely amazes me. And at this point in time, we've made over 90,000 banjos. We're going to hit 100,000 banjo mark in February this coming year. And that will clearly make us the company that's made more banjos than any other company in history. And that isn't something that we set out to accomplish. We never set out, Janet and I didn't sit down at the table and write our business plan and say, let's build 100,000 banjos. We sat down and said, let's do a better job today than we did yesterday. And let's figure out how to do a better job next week than we did last week. One of the things that Janet and I discovered very early on is that a lot of our motivation for business was very based in philosophy and not just in making money. Every business has to make money. If you don't have profit, you can't stay in business. But what your basic motivations are has a profound effect on how well you're going to do. When we were first married, we were coming back from the East Coast, and we stopped in Boulder, Colorado to visit the Ohm Banjo Company. And we hadn't started Deering Banjo Company at that point, but I knew I was going to. And when we visited them, they had like 1 employee. And When we were walking back to the car, I offhandedly said to Janet, I said, we're going to put these guys out of business someday. And I stopped dead in my tracks, looked at Janet and said, no, that's an extremely bad motivation. Says, we don't need to put anybody out of business. In fact, it would be bad for a competitor to go out of business. It says, we would like them to flourish and prosper too. We're just going to do a good job on our own right. And we've continued to operate our business that way. But we haven't done it alone. One of the things I was going to share with you is the contrast from where we are now to where we were when we started. And we didn't build our brand alone. This is Rod Stewart playing one of our banjos. A number of years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I don't remember the exact date, on their Mandolin Wind Tour, this was the center photograph in the centerfold of his concert program. And we've just been really fortunate to have artist after artist come to us and want to play our instrument. We got a call from Rod Stewart's guitar player, and Rod had told his guitar player they wanted a banjo in the new recording, so we sent him a banjo. And Rod took it and started playing it himself, so we had to send him another banjo for the guitar player. And artists, we find the really good ones are always really friendly. When all of the concert tour was done and we had this photograph, we asked Rod Stewart's organization if we could use his photo in our ads. And they said, yeah, but the standard fee, annual fee for using his image in print ads is $250,000. And we said, oh, okay, never mind. We can't do that. But they said in trade for the banjo that we gave them, we could use it in our catalog. So it became a win-win for us. This is Taylor Swift on the Country Music Awards. She's a more recent artist to use our stuff. But when this video hit the market, when I was a kid, I was an Eagle Scout, and I've been a Scoutmaster for 26 years. And when this hit the video world, I started getting emails from all the boys that used to be in my troop going, Mr. Deering, when Taylor Swift comes to the factory, I got to be there. I think the majority of the 18 to 23-year-olds in our country are in love with her. This is Keith Urban from Australia. He started playing our banjo many years ago. I don't remember how many, and when nobody else was playing banjos. And the unique thing about these first three pictures is those are 6-string banjos. They're tuned like a guitar. And the predominant banjo in our culture is a 5-string banjo like this, which is used in bluegrass and folk music. And we're the only ones that really perfected the 6-string banjo. We made them because customers were asking for them. And at first, I didn't like the way they worked. So we worked hard to make them really useful instruments. And then we started having top professionals use them on the stage. So now when somebody wants a 6-string banjo, we're the go-to guys. We don't really have any competitors that make a 6-string banjo that does the job on a professional level. This is Casey Musgraves. She plays a 6-string banjo. And the unique thing about her is that she's put pink sequins all over it. And our tech, Chad Kapadik, has done setup work for her, taught her roadies how to take care of the banjo. And he said it actually looks pretty cool when you see it in person. And this is Winston Marshall from Mumford & Sons. And Mumford & Sons has become one of the very top groups in the whole world. And they play the banjo. And they play our banjo. This is Steve Martin. And he's been a banjo player for a long, long time. He learned to play the banjo when he was in high school. Gentleman next to him is Mark Johnson. Steve Martin has been a champion of the banjo world for a long time. He can't endorse products because of his movie contracts, but he's consistently helped promote the banjo generically. And 4 years ago, he started a foundation. And banjo players can submit their work to the foundation, And every year the board picks the top piece. And the grand prize for winning that competition is $50,000. And Mark Johnson was last year's winner. And this is Scott Avett, the Avett brothers. And he plays our banjo. And these are all artists that are, the Mumford and Sons and the Avett brothers are playing the banjo in non-traditional music. We're currently working with them right now. We're sending them another banjo this afternoon. And as soon as we know that shipped, and my daughter, who does artist relations, is working with them. On October 15th, we're supposed to have a film crew from Good Morning America come to our factory and film, and they want the Avett brothers in the New York studio while they're doing that. So it's amazing that we have to set up stuff like that as a simple banjo maker in Spring Valley. Absolutely amazes me. This is an example of a group that would have never, ever, ever, ever been on my radar. Scotty Morris with the Big Bad Voodoo Daddies. And they're a modern brass dance band. And he recently started playing the banjo, and the significant part for me is Scotty told me that he loves doing his homework and getting on the internet and looking up things. And he said, I came to you guys because you guys keep coming up number one no matter where I looked on the internet. So meant we were probably doing something right. This is Eric Church, another top artist. And again, all these pictures, and except for Steve Martin, you haven't seen a single 5-string banjo yet. This is Ashley Campbell. She's Glenn Campbell's daughter. And she's starting a pretty good career. And this is a photo she supplied to this. I think this is probably taken on the beach at Malibu near her dad's house. That's been a popular picture. It's in our catalog. Chris Funk, the Decemberists. And again, this is a 5-string banjo, but it's not traditional banjo music. This is not traditional banjo music either. This is the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And they're a wonderful group if you ever get a chance to hear them. And they're a new part of our culture that for a long time the banjo was considered a racist instrument that black people would never play because it was a white man's racist music. But historically that's not true. And there's huge heritage of black music and black banjo players playing the banjo. But since bluegrass came out in the late 40s, everybody assumed that the banjo was a white racist instrument. But there's huge amounts of black culture in the banjo, and the Chocolate Drops are the first ones to really break that stereotype and start playing traditional music. In fact, the most popular names of the banjo, I'll give you a little bit of background on the banjo. The modern banjo was invented by Joel Sweeney in 1840 in the United States. The basic concept of a banjo is a drum with strings on it, as opposed to a guitar, which is a wooden box. But the addition of the 5th string and all the metal brackets and all that started in 1840 in the United States. And his inspiration to develop the banjo and play the music was from the African slaves that came over to the United States, and the music was largely African, and the rhythms were African. And that became the foundation of the minstrel period, which lasted until the turn of the century, which was extremely popular. It had the attention of our culture that all of our music and all of our movies have now. It was the main entertainment of our culture from about 1850 through the turn of the century. And it has a bad reputation now as being racist because all the white groups put blackface on. But what the revisionist historians fail to also mention is that there was an equal number of completely black minstrel groups, and they were the better musicians, and they put on the better shows, and the white musicians blackfaced to try to be like them. And it wasn't as racist as you might think. So there's huge historical value and tradition in this. And one of the unique things about it is it's been a saying that you can't play sad music on a banjo. but there is a lot of blues played on the banjo. And these guys are playing a lot of blues, and they're very, very good. And we're delighted that all three of them play our banjo. This is Bela Fleck. He's one of the top modern players. And the instrument he's playing is an electric banjo. And I designed and built that banjo because I kept running into five-string banjo players that were earning a living playing electric guitar, because an acoustic banjo wouldn't work in a rock and roll setting. So I designed an instrument that would. And when we first developed it, took it to the first trade show, I really got laughed at. People literally were laughing out loud at me, thinking it was the silliest thing they'd ever seen. But when Bela Fleck started playing it, they quit laughing. And we got a patent on that instrument, and we've made thousands of them, and have a lot of different people playing them. We also hit the very traditional side. This is Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger is the one that started the whole folk movement back in the 40s and early 50s. And his career was cut short because he's a communist, and the McCarthy period blacklisted him. And people always thought that that was too bad, that he was unfairly treated. But with the climate of the time, he is an absolute dyed-in-the-wool avowed communist. I went to a workshop once where he spent 20 minutes talking to us about what a great man Stalin was. To put it into perspective, Pete sees the utopia of the communist idea. He doesn't have a clue in his universe of the reality of it. But he wrote songs like Where Have All the Flowers Gone? So he's a real icon in the folk area. And to have a relationship with Pete Seeger is an incredible honor for me. This is an example of a mainstream bluegrass musician, Graham Sharp. He plays in the Steep Canyon Ranger, which is the group that travels with Steve Martin. It's Terry Bauckham, another really mainstream bluegrass musician. And for me, to put it into perspective for you, when I first started, I'm a San Diego boy, making banjos in San Diego area. The banjo world is on the East Coast. Bluegrass was born in Kentucky, and it was an extremely hard sell to get a bluegrass musician to take my banjo seriously. And for a long, long, long time, I was the other guy. And the main competitor I had was Gibson. And Gibson had been making banjos since about 1902. And their banjos made in the 30s were the icons that all the bluegrass guys played. And we're finally conquering that. And we got a fairly good majority of the mainstream players are playing our banjos now. It's another example. Doc Watson is a mainstream bluegrass musician. And David Holt is a traditional mountain musician. I'll share something about the Dropkick Murphys. They're an Irish punk band out of Boston. And when I started in business, I never thought, oh, I'm going to build a banjo for an Irish punk band. But these guys are amazing, and they're a family group. They run their own scene. They manage themselves, and they're absolutely amazing at what they do. When we started working with them about 3 years ago, they had 500,000 friends on their Facebook. And when they'd book a tour, they'd put it on their Facebook, and it would be sold out in minutes. Today, they have over 1.5 million friends on their Facebook. And the social media has become an extremely powerful tool. My daughter does artist relations, and we have 2 different Dropkick Murphy models. And we, a little while back, gave them one of our Dropkick Murphy models, and they put it on their Facebook as a raffle. And all you had to do to win was send in your email address. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it took like 10 minutes for us to get like 15,000 email addresses. And in the world of business, that's amazing, and it's surprising to me how many people in the business community are still poo-pooing the social media. It's extremely powerful. And it could be, too, that it works better in the entertainment industry because they can amass a lot of friends. I'm blocking it there. Here. These are a couple of gold records, one from Montgomery Gentry, and this one's hard to read. That's from Joe Satriani. He's a heavy metal guitar player. And I don't know anything about heavy metal guitar. I'm a folk musician. Rock and roll was evil when I was a kid, you know. I was a folky. This record came in from UPS in a box we didn't recognize, and that box sat unopened in our office for about 2 months. I was cleaning up the office and opened up the box, and here's this gold album. And what had happened is Joe Satriani had come into our display at the music trade show in Anaheim, played our banjos and left, and I didn't have a clue as to who he was. And then his manager ordered a banjo for him, and still I didn't have any clues who he was. And the box was labeled ready to go in our shipping department, and one of our young guys working for us saw his name on there and went, "Joe Satriani." And I said, "So, who's he?" They changed the radio station. It wasn't 10 minutes, and they went, "That's Joe Satriani." So that album went gold, and they sent us the gold album. These are platinum albums from the Dixie Chicks. And Emily, the banjo player in the Dixie Chicks, was the first one to really, really make a major difference in the banjo culture in our career. Prior to them getting to Nashville, banjos were banned in country music in my lifetime. And if a top country musician wanted a banjo in a song, they'd cut it from the album. When the Dixie Chicks, they were the #1 group in the world when they went to Nashville, and they were told no banjo, and they walked. Said, "Okay, goodbye, we're not going to record them." So Nashville had to change their mind and start using banjos. When we first saw the Dixie Chicks, we asked Emily where she got her banjo, and she said, "Don't you remember?" And she goes, "We bought it from you at Winfield when I was a little girl." And she had come to us at a festival when she was 15 and bought that instrument, and we hadn't made the connection. And Mumford and Sons again. Bela Fleck and Tony Trischka. Now, Jens Kruger is one of the top musicians in the world. He was the music you were hearing earlier here, and he's a top mentor for us, because he not only is a virtuoso player, but he knows the physics behind the way the banjo sounds. And with his help is why we're getting so many of the top pros playing our banjo. This is me when I was 3 years old, sitting next to an airplane that my dad built. This is when I was 3 years old, also with tools that my dad gave me. And I still have some of those tools. So my dad spent a lot of time teaching me to be a good craftsman. When I was 7 years old, he bought me the tools to be a draftsman, taught me to be a draftsman. And so I've been learning how to design and build things since a very young age. And my first introduction to the banjo came from the Kingston Trio. And the song that they did that caught me was a record that my parents bought, and it was a song called The Tijuana Jail. And it was a song that was about an actual event back in the 50s. A casino had been opened in Tijuana, and a lot of people from San Diego were invited, and they went down, and everybody got arrested and ended up in the jail. A friend of my parents wrote a song about it, so we had the record. More Kingston Trio, and this is the current Kingston Trio. So I fell in love with the banjo because of the Kingston Trio, and now I make all their banjos. So it's beyond my wildest dreams come true. And this is a group I played in college, the main four guys in the middle. This is the shop that we all got to be part of. This opened in Lemon Grove in May of 1970, and it's a little shop that operated like a co-op. The guy in the back with the long hair is Sam Radding, and it was his shop, but he ran it like a co-op. It was called the American Dream. The guy sitting next to him is Bob Taylor. I've known Bob Taylor since before he built his first guitar. This is Janet and myself sitting on our front porch sanding banjo necks when we first started in business. So we looked like hippies, but we didn't smoke marijuana, so we got a lot of work done. This is Janet kneeling there. And when we first started, we had partners for a little while. And this is at our first trade show in Chicago in 1975. And when the partnership dissolved and we were on our own, we worked out of our house, and the living room was the shipping department. Then we moved into a shop, and for a while, this is Bob Taylor and myself, our shops were right next door to each other, and that was before they started growing real fast. The shop of our old factory. This is our current factory. Much, much larger, but we still have a lot of manual machines, a lot of handwork, a lot of personal skill and talent in our workforce. Loading up a computerized machine. We have 6 CNC mills nowadays. This is an example of a value stream chart that we use. We're very, very much into lean manufacturing. This is a graph. Can you see it very well?
Yeah, it goes up.
Yeah. It starts in 1983. We had, and we considered those successful years. We were still putting food on the table in those years. And you can see we got some pretty substantial growth. That first big dip was internal problems. We had hired some bad people and we're struggling a bit. We handled that and went back up to the next highest spot. And we thought things were really, really good. But then we started having an increase in Chinese competition. And we started going down. And then the end of '08, things in the whole economy got really bad. And we ended up with 2 more years of really, really struggle. But we managed to hold on. When we hit the bottom, we still had 31 employees because they were our core and we didn't want to let go of them. And then the culture changed. See, the banjo used to be just bluegrass and folk music and a little bit of Dixieland. We had tiny little niche markets. But when things like the Dixie Chicks and the Mumford and Sons and the Avett Brothers and stuff started happening, the banjo shed its normal cultural boundaries and our customer base grew exponentially. But also just to share some of the philosophical things that we follow. Aaron mentioned that we took a class when we first started in the business about how to stay in business, because the statistics for businesses failing in the first year is huge. And the guy taught the class had example after example of businesses that had failed. And Janet and I observed that every single one of those businesses had run into a set of problems they decided not to deal with, and they quit. And every one of them could have been solved. So we made a pact with each other that no matter what happened, we wouldn't quit. We've had to draw on that a number of times, but we haven't quit. Another thing that we rely on is the principle that nothing stays the same. Things are either getting better or they're getting worse. They're either growing or shrinking. And if one isn't actively working on making it better, it's automatically going to get worse. I have so many of them, I had to write them down so I wouldn't forget them all. The other thing about not quitting is also not listening to people say you can't do it or tell you no. When I first started in business, both my parents thought I was nuts. Erin mentioned a college professor. When I was building my first instrument, the head of the industrial arts department was looking over my shoulder and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Making an instrument." He says, "Well, we don't approve of that." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Because it's not representative of the woodworking industry." The other thing, and I don't want to be religious or controversial here, but Janet and I became Scientologists. And I'm not trying to promote her or say anything about that, but Ron Hubbard wrote a whole set of volumes on administrative technology and how groups work and how economies work. And we use some of those formulas, which are kind of philosophical. And one of them, the formula for prosperity, is exchange in abundance. If you exchange with your customers in abundance, you will have prosperity. Another one is the number of dollars you are able to bring in is a measure of how much attention you've attracted. We have a friend that was a business consultant, and he had a client who was a street performer who juggled. And he worked at Venice Beach in the daytime and Hollywood Boulevard at night. And he was making like 3 times more money at night at Hollywood Boulevard than he was at the beach, even though there was 10 times more people at the beach. And the consultant watched him a bit, and he said, you know why you're making more money at night is because your flaming batons are attracting more attention. So he said, work out something you can do on the beach that attracts more attention. And he's the guy that developed the routine of juggling chainsaws. And he was on the Johnny Carson show many times, and he was able to not work at night anymore. Another thing that's important about the philosophy behind companies, behind a business, and having your foundation be your philosophy has been really validated by us studying the Toyota company and the Toyota way. Because the Toyota way isn't just their manufacturing techniques, it's the philosophy that is the foundation of the company. And just basic philosophies like, we're not here to make money, we're here to make the world a better place. Toyota has that as a philosophy. Janet and I have had that as part of our business plan statement since day one. The other part that we're really truly blessed in is the motivating factor behind everything we've done has been the magic of the music. It was the music that attracted me to the banjo, and it's the continuing to be the music that gives us customers for the banjos. Another example of how business is really important, but some people miss the boat. We were at our music trade show a number of years ago, and this team of people walked up to me and said, we're from The Price is Right. Would you guys be interested in having your banjos on our program? And I said, you bet. Who wouldn't say that? And they went, really? And I said, what do you mean, really? Since we've been here all day, and you're the first ones that have said yes. We were on The Price is Right 4 or 5 times a year for 8 years. Millions of people got to see our product, and all we had to do is deliver a banjo when somebody won it. I think over those 8 years, we delivered like 12 banjos. You know? Who would have said no to that? Another example of how we reach for things. Early on, I was at the International Bluegrass Music Association convention, which is where my wife is right now, back in North Carolina. And I went to a seminar on radio advertising. And it was a seminar where people that had syndicated bluegrass radio shows were talking to people that had radio shows on, and the subject was how to get advertisers. Well, I'm sitting in the audience as a potential advertiser. And I went to the colonel who had the largest radio station afterwards and says, what's it cost to be advertised on your radio? It says $10,000 a year. Well, I couldn't do that. Couldn't do that at all. And I said, but I told the colonel, I said, there's got to be a way I can be on the your radio program. And he says, well, if you think of it, let me know. So that night I came up with an idea, and I went back to him the next day and I said, how about I give you one of our banjos and you raffle it on your radio show over the next few months? And he goes, that's a great idea. So for the cost of one banjo, I was on his radio show every week for 6 months. And we've always had lots of advertising and have always found ways like that of doing it when we didn't have the cash to do it. But going back to internationally, we've always had customers ordering things from overseas. But in 2005, we started doing the Frankfurt show in Germany, the big music show, and started increasing how much we did in Europe. And throughout this downslide here, probably 40% of the sales we managed to have during those downslides came from our overseas customers. And without that, we probably would have gone out of business. And it was my wife's determination to aggressively go after the European market. And since then, our number one dealer in the whole world is in Huddersfield, England. And the end of this month, we're going to England to do Deering Day at Eagle Music. Another thing that happened on internationally, something that's future work for us, is the Kruger brothers, who you heard their music, were playing with us at the fair in Frankfurt. And before they started playing, Jens Kruger came to me and said, "Greg, there's 700 million poor people in India." I said, "Yeah, that's bad." He goes, No. He says, "That means there's 300 million rich people in India." And he said, one of their main traditional instruments is the sarod, and it's a kind of a banjo. He says, "We got to go to India." And I said, "Okay, let's go to India." They start playing, and this man in a robe and a turban comes by, and he stops and listens to the whole set. And when they're done, he walks over and hands the cards to Jens and said, "I'm the Minister for Music Education for India. You need to come to India." Things like that happen to us all the time.
Maybe this would be a good opportunity to open it up for questions. I know a lot of you have to get to class as your teacher, so maybe you've got some questions.
Yes, sir.
Was your instrument on the movie The Deer Hunter?
Pardon?
The Deer Hunter.
Was
your
instrument, your banjo, in the movie The Deer Hunter?
That wasn't ours.
Okay.
Was it Dennis Dirksen?
Pardon?
Was it Dennis Dirksen as the chair of the department?
Dirksen? No, he wasn't. It was Dr. Hammer.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about your supplier network, who you source from, and if you've opened it up to international supply?
Which network?
Your supply chain?
We try to stay domestic. We're not 100% domestic. Some of the stuff we use, particularly like the tuners on our banjo, we do not have a good domestic supplier. But we're also actively pursuing, have 100% of our parts made in-house, which means we just buy raw materials. But, so, does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
How valuable is the Made in USA?
Extremely valuable, particularly in the USA, but it makes a big difference in Europe too. Now, there's European banjo makers, but the American banjos are always considered the more desirable.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you've had going into overseas markets and how you've overcome some of that?
One of the challenges we had early on, we got an order for like 25 banjos from a music store in France. And this was when we were still working out of our garage. And an order for 25 banjos was like 3 months worth of work. And we were ecstatic that we got this. And we happened to have my uncle come visit, who was in charge of the shipping department for a multi-million-dollar computer company in Minnesota. We showed him the order and how excited we were, and he says, "Well, you got to really watch out for France. If you ship that on a 30-day account, you'll never see a dime." And he said, France there's no ability for an American citizen to collect a bad debt in France. It's impossible. And he had an experience where his computer company had sold a $250,000 computer to a company in France, and the executives gave him 30 days, and my Uncle George told him that you won't see any of that money. And they said, "Oh yeah, we will, they'll pay." Well, they sent the computer and they never got paid for it. So we sent a pro forma invoice, which means they got to pay in advance, and we never heard from them again. So that saved us. But internationally, we deal direct with music stores. We don't have distributors. And shipping has been the only real challenge, keeping the shipping costs down, making sure that the VAT is handled properly. Yes, sir.
Are you in the Latin American market?
We have sold banjos to Brazil, and we have a dealer in Mexico. And the Brazilian market is starting to show signs that it might actually expand a little bit. And I think Mexico and Brazil and the Latin countries can potentially really fall in love with the banjo. We've just finished making a nylon string, 6-string banjo that we suspect will fit into the Latin market really strong.
A question about social media. How much of your operation is dedicated, focused towards social media?
Well, we have a full-time marketing manager who also does all our graphic arts. We have a full-time public relations person, and my daughter is full-time artist relations. And then we have 2 full-time salespeople, and Jamie here is a vice president of operations, and all of them are involved to a greater or lesser degree. But the social media is about staying on top of it all the time, and it's so powerful. We were at a festival just last April in North Carolina, and I'm doing a workshop about banjo maintenance and setup, and I've got 20 people watching me, and I'm taking a banjo apart and putting it back together, and my daughter's over here with her cell phone taking pictures. And while I'm doing this workshop, she's posting these pictures on our Facebook. When I was done, she came over to me and showed me the phone and says, "You got 72 likes on this workshop already." It's powerful media. But it does take somebody taking after it.
So talking about taking your brand global, can you expand a little bit about the competitive advantage that Deering tries to put into each bando to make it better than your competition, both domestic and overseas?
Well, one of the stories I didn't get to share with you, when I was a kid and wanted a better banjo, I couldn't afford it. I would walk home from school every day and go into a music shop on the way home from school, and there was a Vega banjo standing there, sort of hanging there, and it was $450 in 1963. So a 13-year-old in 63 wasn't going to buy a $400 banjo. So my goal when I built my first banjo because I wanted a better banjo, couldn't afford it. And I was a good craftsman, so I did it. So my basic motivation has been to build banjos, really good banjos that people can afford, or that I could have afforded back when I was a kid. And amongst all my competition, I'm the only one doing that. All the rest of my competition are building banjos and charging whatever they think they should be charged for. So we have banjos in the $2,500 to $2,800 range that are completely professional banjos when our competition starts in at $3,500 and more. Plus, we're the only American maker that makes low-price banjos. We make banjos that start in at $499, and we don't have any American competition. The only people we have in that price range are Chinese. So that quality and that value that we put into every one of our instruments is why we're so competitive.
I think maybe Mr. Deering said he would stay for additional questions, so we'll let those of you who need to go respect that. But thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Deering.
Thank you.
All our responders, thank you so much.
Thank you.